Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. Today, we will be talking about monetizing beyond traditional SaaS pricing plans. So what happens when you move beyond the common plans, any friction that's created, how we can help you alleviate that, as well as what we've seen others have done. So specifically, when we talk about moving beyond traditional plans, so you think about when you're going from single product to multi-product or platform, you're looking for multiple ways to monetize, right? And no longer just seat-based or tiered-based, right? So we tend to see that companies employ a strategy that's multi-axis pricing, where in a single plan, they're trying to create multiple ways to drive upsell. When you get to that level, is very advantageous to make sure you're decoupling those changes from engineering, so you don't slow them down in the roadmap deliveries and innovation. And ultimately, when you do that, you want to make sure in these plans, because you have a number of areas now you're monetizing, you want to preserve the ability to not capture revenue, not have leakage of revenue, right? So that means being able to control the application as well as user experiences based on what you have delivered to your customer. So when we look specifically at monetization, we know, of course, monetization is the most effective way to grow. But more specifically, I've been speaking to a number of executives recently, and they're actually intentionally slowing down their growth rate. They're leaning into monetization and operational efficiency, and they want to find areas to drive more efficient growth so that when they turn the tap back on, right, they're really driving growth in an efficient way. Specifically for us, how we see these challenges I'll talk about today show up in the business is really about high churn, operational efficiency, and agility, going to market in expansion areas, whether it's a different segment, different market, different geography. So for example, high churn, we see sometimes that high churn can be related to how inflexible a price and packaging may be, right? You may have customers who they would pay a premium for maybe a smaller number of features, but they feel that they're buying an entire plan and they don't use many of the features in the plan. So they feel that their value to price is misaligned, right? In the case of operational efficiency, when companies are growing from single product to multi-product, whether that's organic or inorganic through acquisition, sometimes you have redundant systems, right? So we see software monetization helping a number of these root causes to really drive some outcomes in the business. When we think specifically about the Thales Sentinel platform, right? So we offer a platform that is really based on an entitlement single source of truth backend and license and SDK, right? So a license and entitlement platform. We make sure that we have a ability to offer you the rights to control the application experience based on what was purchased. We do so from the back end, which is really a single source of truth for all entitlement management, whether it's a license entitlement, software, service, etc. By being the single source of truth and really enabling you to integrate to any area of your ecosystem. Integration is with low code, no code, or webhooks, etc., API. We have unique data insights around all of those entitlements, right? So we help you to visualize those entitlements or pull that into your own BI so you can get some logic on that unique entitlement data we have. So if we were to look at a very common use case from the platform, so driving your order, of course, will be coming from either an ERP, CRM, billing, even a marketplace, right? So you get the details and the data of what a customer purchased. If you're moving beyond a traditional license model or pricing model, you'll have multiple entries, right? So you'll have a subscription, you'll have a plan, you'll have number of users, you may have add-ons, you may have different limits, right? So this is where the complexity comes in, where we begin to solve, where it makes sense to have a dedicated license and entitlement offering. So we get those details and we pass on those details through integration to the appropriate integration point, so that when a user logs into your application, they're able to really have an experience based on what they purchase and what you define, right? You can define experiences where you allow customers overage, or you add the overage, you prompt them to buy more, right? So you have the full control of how you control in the application experience. But the point is you have the control and it's not over or underuse, misaligning and disrupting the value to what a customer has paid for. So let's look at some of these. If we talk about moving beyond the traditional monetization approaches, right? So what are the traditional approaches? So the two I'll talk about today is, two everyone is kind of common and really understands very well, right? the user or seat-based model, or the plan or tier model. First thing I'll say is these models are good, right? When you typically have a single product, if you're looking for product market fit, or if you're finding that first, traction area, right? These models have both pros and cons, and they do help, to help drive some outcomes, usually in product market fit or initial traction, right? Where is it working? Where is the product aligned to our market? But there are limitations in these models that actually can cause inefficient growth, right? They challenge sometimes what a customer is willing to pay for, as well as how you can scale and support this as you go on. So let's see what I mean by this. So if we look particularly at the seat-based model, again, we all know seat-based, right? You essentially give access to your platform or your product. Every customer can do the same things, and you only differentiate based on the number of users someone buys. Typically, the more users they get a discounted price, typically. There are many pros in this approach, right? So some of the pros, of course, it is really easy for users to buy as low friction sale, at least the first sale. Then it encourages more users to adopt, right? The more users on the platform, the more value you get, the more value they get. Sometimes, though, we see that this model is not aligned to the expected value a customer extracts from the product, right? They may be only using a very small subset of your features, right? It can cause high churn because, again, with that same use case, you may have customers who they only need to use a small amount of features to get the value, but they're paying for the entire platform. So they may look at it and say, we're paying for more than we're using. It also challenges how you can upsell. You can only upsell if you have more users on your platform. And in the tiered model, right? So again, we're very accustomed to this. You typically have 3 tiers on a website. There's just a blog article, right? Go into more details there. But some of the things I like, it helps you understand the users better. And it creates ability for you to upsell based on the value your users decide or would like to get out of your application. Again, sometimes this is not aligned to the customer's willingness to pay. And it may lead to churn, right? For the same exact point I mentioned in the user model. Sometimes the packages are not aligned to what customers really get value from. They may be thinking, I'm only using, again, a small set of features, or I only want one feature from the premium plan, and I'm not able to pay for that, so they don't even buy at all, right? So helping you or causing you to be challenged with market share, etc. So if we were to look at this, I have one example for one of our customers who leverage our platform to drive some growth, right? They were selling in a model very close to the seat-based model, right? So they had a machine, a device they sold, and they wanted to monetize more of their software and SaaS offerings. So they were essentially selling per machine, and the only way they had to upsell an existing user or expand revenue with an existing user is if the user needed or the company needed another machine. So they actually relooked at what are the models we can use to go beyond that traditional approach. They added pay-per-use and some additional models you can check out in the case study. And that drove some outcome to them, right? And increasing the average revenue per user. So it's really exciting to see how they adopt different models and how they now look for different models in different markets to drive more value for both them as well as their customer. So let's talk about that. How can you be like these companies who are leveraging multi-axis pricing, find what works for you and grow, right? So I have a chart that kind of lays out, the common possibilities, right? When you think about multi-axis pricing, you'll still have users, you still have plans, right? But you'll have different metrics. You'll have a value metric, you'll have maybe add-ons, you'll have different stores or transactions. One of the notes I want to make sure I share is that the goal is not to have all of these. The companies who do well, growing at a sustainable and efficient way, typically they have 2 to 3 pricing axes in the plan, right? So 2 to 3 is usually the sweet spot where customers are driving value. So let's look specifically at the value metric. So in my example, I have a fictitious project management software. So the value metric is project. The more projects someone is managing, the more value they're getting out of the offering. So I want to align the pricing based on that value metric, projects in use or active projects, how you want to define projects. But there's actually some real data behind this, right? There's data that says, companies who are using, for example, tiered only, right? Tiered only and no additional value metric or different axes, they grow and expand revenue probably a 9, 10% rate. But a company who adds now a value metric to that, they have the ability to expand further. And why that is multiple price axes helps you to find more than one way to upsell and expand with a particular user. So think about it. If you only have user seats, as I mentioned before, you can only expand if that user buys more seats. But if you have now different ways, in this case, a value metric or a transaction, if they need more users or they need to transact more, add more value metric, you've opened up ability to upsell based on multiple things. Likewise, in churn, companies who have multiple price axes, right, at least one value metric in their plan, also sees lower churn than companies who don't price on a value metric. So there's actually real data behind this, right, which is really interesting to see how the market continues to track and how companies try to adopt multiple price axes in their offers. So where is this good and where is this bad? So as I mentioned before, it helps you to unlock multiple ways to upsell a user. And I think one of the nice things many companies like is it's a way that you can add more value without product innovation, right? You don't have to rely on bringing out new features to add more value. Of course, you'll still do that, right? But you can find multiple ways to add and create value to different customer segments, market geographies with what you have already. Now, one of the big cautions is if you pursue this model, you really need to have some ability to have a dedicated license and entitlement functionality. It becomes very challenging for an engineering team to maintain this. Now they're going from hard coding only different features in the plan to being able to react to add-ons when they need to be sold, to different value metrics, amounts and storage and different transaction rates, etc. Becomes very hard for engineering full-time to really focus on without disrupting their product engineering cycle and your innovation cycle, right? So there's also maybe the challenge or the ability to disrupt revenue recognition a bit. I wouldn't say disrupt, but make it more complicated. I've seen companies add levels of service to their axes, right, to their plans, where you may have upfront onboarding and that's not recurring, and then bundling them together, you just need to make sure you separate out those rules and recognize the revenue appropriately. So how can you find the model that works best for you, right? How can you implement what's right and find your way to go beyond traditional models? Well, the first thing I mentioned, I want to reiterate again, is you don't have to chase all of the different pricing axes. You want to find what works for you, for your customers, for your market, etc. There's two things you do need to be aware of, though, if you pursue this model. You want to make sure you do this model in a way where you do not open yourself up to revenue leak or engineering scope creep. And what I mean by that is, again, if you have the tools that's only hard coding limits and decisions of packaging and pricing in your code, in your core code, and you rely on engineering, you are going to be faced with a challenge where you need engineering every time to make a change, right? It's highly recommended. This is where you begin focusing on software monetization solutions that's dedicated. It helps you to separate and decouple engineering teams' work from the go-to-market teams' work. Go-to-market teams are able to find what works for them, adjust their pricing, or sales team can sell different terms when and where it makes sense, right, according to your policy, without requiring engineering to make a change, right? So this is really one point. The control side, you want to have not just the ability to decouple engineering, but you want to be able to control how the application reacts to different limits and different terms, etc. As Ernst & Young mentioned, right, every company is open to revenue leakage, but the more you look at those different plans and you add different layers, right, that you have to control, what would happen if someone went from, in my example, 3 projects to 4, right? What's the experience? Do you allow it? Do you stop it? Do you shift them to a buying experience? So you want to drive, workflows based on those limits, and that's going to be the range where, you're going to hinder and harm your engineering team, where they have to make a trade-off between your own features versus now building out, maintaining, and managing workflows that's designed for commercialism as well as monetization. Decoupling, right, from go-to-market teams, or decoupling engineering from business models and go-to-market teams. You want your business team to be able to find the right ways to go to market and, different market, different geographies, customers' willingness to pay changes, right? You may have disruption in your market where you have to change the plan and pricing. So you want this flexibility, right? You want to make sure that when you need to change, it's iterative, yes, but only for the business team, right? Let the business team find what works without disrupting operations and engineering. Keep engineering and team focused. One of the changes you'll see is you'll shift and play around with different pricing, different tiers, different limits, etc. Right? Trying to find that sweet spot between value and offer, right? What the customer is paying for versus what you're offering. So this is what we do in our platform, right? We help companies really climb up the ladder through monetization, and they can innovate and automate as much or as little as they want to. I'm not going to go through every single box here, right? But the bottom two rungs on this ladder is really about the traditional approaches, right? It works if you're not looking at expanding your different models or changing to meet customers' willingness to pay or enter new markets, etc. But when you think about looking at where you can automate, again, if you're growing from single product to multi-product, or you have a platform approach you're now developing, or you're acquiring company, you're going to look at efficiencies, right? And this is where a homegrown solution usually doesn't help, because you need the ability to integrate the ecosystem, as well as the flexibility I mentioned of offering new packages and new models, right? So the more you sort of go up the ladder, the more sustainable growth you'll get, right? With data we've seen as well as others, we see that license and entitled enabled business models drive sustainable as well as efficient growth. So again, here's a study, not just my words, right, but one from our customer in Korea, right? So they are really on a mission to help to detect cancer early. In their case, they went public and they saw their sales increasing, right, which is really great for them. And they wanted a way to react to that quickly and scale in a scalable way. So they looked at a dedicated dedicated license entitlement solution, and we met their use cases, and they continue to use us to meet their automation and their efficiency and their growth use cases. You can feel free to look at the case study, right? And really, really great information there. So look, as we close and wrap up today, I want to remind you, really leveraging licensing entitlement, you can find efficient growth, and you can go beyond traditional models. Going beyond traditional models opens you up to a number of growth opportunities and efficiency opportunities, right? But there are some key things you need to do. You need to make sure that you're decoupling engineering from the packaging and pricing decisions, where hard coding is not needed for every decision, and you do have the ability to control the compliance, right? You have the ability to control what you're selling, so you can preserve your right to drive expansion, as well as control user experiences in your application. So if you look down below, you'll see a link that will have some helpful information. You of course, can contact a salesperson, contact us to have any questions, any dialogue you have, to see how we can more specifically apply this to you. So look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day.